So good afternoon. I'm Jack Advent. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio Veterinary Medical Association. And very soon you're going to also hear from Dr. Allison Lash, who's with the Cleveland Animal Protective League. And Allison has also served as the chair of the OVMA's Animal Abuse Recognition and Reporting Task Force. And they put together some absolutely phenomenal materials that she'll talk a little bit about, and we'll share some more information and links about those as well that I think will really help you. We're also recording this, so you know. So if at any point you have to leave or you want to listen to it again for different points, you can certainly do that. A couple just housekeeping issues. It's a fairly large group, almost 100 people are signed up. So to ask questions, we're going to ask you to do that in the chat room. We're going to actually hold questions till the end, so we make sure that we get the core material. I think a lot of the questions you might have, we will cover during the presentation, so we're not duplicative. We'll just go back and reference those at the end. We've got a fair amount of time. We've got an hour and a half allotted, so we should have plenty of time to answer questions that you can submit there. We're also going to, in the chat room, Kristen is going to post a CE certificate. Just so you know, you do not need a CE certificate in the state of Ohio, but if you really want one, you can have it. You should also know that in Ohio, because this program is put on by the OVMA, we are what is known as a pre-approved provider. Therefore, it is approved for continuing education in the state of Ohio right now. So, and then let's say we'll have some other resources, some links in the chat room that you can access. There also, everything is available on the OVMA website. So if you go to on the home page, we've actually added our animal abuse recognition materials as a separate tab, and you'll be able to see it there and click on that. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to cover, just some different areas today. Just quickly, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the background of House Bill 33, which was the legislation that the Ohio legislature passed, which established mandatory reporting for veterinarians as well as some others with respect to animal abuse in the state of Ohio. I'm going to go over some of the key provisions of House Bill 33, some of the areas where it references with respect to the animal cruelty statute. Allison is going to get into some detail about scenarios, when to report or not, building a relationship with humane agents, just some common things that I'm sure that a lot of these things are on your mind about how would I handle this situation. And Allison's got a great deal of experience and certainly is well versed in the law, and she'll be able to help paint a picture, I think, for that. So with that, let's talk a little bit about, first of all, why we're basically all here, which is House Bill 33. So House Bill 33 was actually introduced back in the early stages of the 133rd General Assembly in Ohio, back in February of 2019. And as most legislation, it actually takes a while to work through the process. And it wasn't actually until June of 2020 when it passed its first barrier or litmus test, if you, which was a vote of the Ohio House of Representatives. As you can see, it passed very easily. It then moved over to the Senate and worked its way through the committee hearing process there, and was passed in the near the final days of the General Assembly in December of 2020. Governor DeWine then signed that in January. Laws in Ohio become effective 90 days after the governor signs it. So it is, and we're going to see, there's a little confusion in some of the materials that you might see. We show the law as becoming effective April 6th. There's some materials that say April 12th. Either way, it's very soon coming, whichever way you want to look at it. The OVMA, just so you know, OVMA was actively involved with this legislation once it was introduced. We spent a considerable time with the other interested parties, with the sponsors. In the early versions, honestly, there were some things that were very problematic from our perspective. Just some scenarios in terms of criminal penalties and or substantial fines for failure to report, who was going to review your decision to report or not. They also had veterinary technicians in there, and on the surface, some people might think, well, that's okay, but the scenario we saw was potentially where a technician would be saying, I think we have to report this, and the veterinarian is saying, no, I think it's okay. And we didn't want to create those scenarios where there was conflicts or disputes within a veterinary clinic or shelter or whatever the situation is. So we felt it best to be left to the veterinarian to be making that decision. So the legislation, as it ended up being passed, OVMA worked with the sponsor, got a number of things, modifications made. And I'll talk a little bit in just a minute about what those were. And in the end, the OVMA Board of Directors elected to support the legislation. We actually testified on behalf of it. Part of that honestly goes to, there has always been an ethical responsibility to report animal abuse in your profession in terms of the appropriate authorities. We hope you don't see it, but we know that chances are at some point in your career, you probably are going to encounter at least one instance of that, if not more. And one of the key drivers of this legislation when it was introduced is there's a lot of very strong evidence with respect to the correlation between human violence and abusive situations in the home towards children and or others living there, and violence against animals. And so obviously if we see violence against animals in a home, and we know that there are children or others in there who potentially might also be being abused, it only reinforces the importance of reporting those situations, obviously for the welfare of the animal, but also for the welfare certainly of the people living in that house as well. The law does also, and along those lines, it includes those social service professionals, as well as dog wardens, are now required to also report animal abuse when they suspect it. And the key thing about, I think, and hopefully will make you, I'm sure there's some concerns and questions, but just so you know, a lot of other states have already addressed the issue of mandatory abuse reporting with respect to animals. Whoops, going back the wrong way. And you probably can't see this really clearly, but just, about 20 states actually have a mandatory animal abuse reporting system in place. So Ohio has joined us. Most of those have been in place for quite some time. We talked to those state VMAs to get a sense, what kinds of situations are there problems you've encountered, and quite honestly, in all those situations, there was no sense that it had created an emergence of a lot of problems for veterinarians. In fact, in some situations, they shared that veterinarians actually welcomed it, not just from an ethical standpoint, but also they felt that by having to report it, it actually allowed them to say to someone, look, I have to report this by law. It's not a question of me just making a determination. It's something I'm bound to do. So that kind of almost, it takes you off the hook, but also it creates a certain layer there. And then a lot of other states actually provide some reference to abuse reporting in states. In many situations, that involves an element of, if you report, there's a immunity from civil liability. As you can see there in the purple states, which Ohio obviously no longer is, there's not a whole bunch, actually about only 10 states that had not addressed the issue of mandatory abuse reporting. So let's just talk briefly about some of the key provisions that are in House Bill 33. The first one is that you must immediately report suspected animal abuse as a veterinarian, okay? It applies, this law, House Bill 33, applies to companion animals. So a companion animal in the statute is actually a dog or cat, regardless of where it's kept, or any other animal which is kept in the residence, okay? It does not apply to livestock and wildlife. Now, with respect to wildlife, with respect to livestock, there are other provisions in the law. It doesn't mean you can't turn that into a humane agent. We're just talking again about what House Bill 33 requires, and it applies to companion animals. There's also things with respect to livestock where you would probably one of a very logical place would be to go to the Department of Agriculture. There, what are known as livestock care standards, and ODA would send out an investigator. That's another option in addition to a humane agent. So the law says that you're going to report it to an officer, which is as defined in the law. And I've made some references here. Again, the law will be accessible to you in the links if you want to go through the entire thing. But it says you're going to contact a humane agent, which would be really the most recommended because those are the individuals that have some experience and would have the training and really probably know how to handle this better. You can also report it to law enforcement. Probably a lot of police departments would say, well, let's turn that over to the humane agent in our county. And every county has a humane agent. Okay, those are appointed by the court. There can be there's at least one, and some counties obviously have more than one. And then you can also, or you could also report it to an animal control officer, your dog warden, et cetera. And Allison could probably talk a little bit more about the roles of the humane agents, but that's probably your first logical step. And if you're wondering who that is, the resources we have on our website will point you directly. You can put in your county and you will be able to identify who that individual is. The law also says that your report can either just be oral, spoken, or it could be in writing. The report has to provide a description of the animal. It has to provide the contact information of the owner or caretaker that you're aware of, the nature of suspected abuse. Why are you sharing this? And any other information that you would deem that would be relevant to that individual, to that person that's going to investigate it. It's important to note, and I know Allison will get into this a little bit more, it's not your job at this point. You're not having to prove it per se. You just have to have a reasonable suspicion that animal abuse may have occurred or is ongoing. It's not a situation where you're thinking, well, I really can't, I'm not sure I can prove this. It's a question more like a preponderance. Is there enough evidence there in your medical judgment to believe you should turn this over to someone to investigate? And it's their job and the court's job then to determine whether in fact this was a situation of animal abuse. Key things over here on the right side of the column. So if you make a report in what is known as good faith, in other words, just medically speaking, you've done it for the right reasons, you honestly believe, and you're not trying to, because you're mad at this individual and trying to get back at them or that type of thing. You make this as good faith as a veterinarian. House Bill 33 extends to you civil and criminal liability immunity for your report. In other words, you cannot be, you have an immediate defense if you were ever sued by that individual. So I think that's important. You're not going to have any criminal action taken against you, again, as long as you do that in good faith. Key element is how will it be determined whether you, in a situation where perhaps you didn't report, and there are some who believe that you should have. That failure to report situation is going to be reviewed by the Ohio Veterinary Medical Licensing Board. So that's your peers. So you're going to have other medical professionals making that determination and judgment as to why in this case you didn't report it, and you will be able to present at that point the information is why you elected not to do that. So again, you're really being judged by those who would have medical training, and you would be able to articulate that. And so we think that's a key element in terms of determining whether that was truly a failure or not to report. Also, we had put in the law, so your first violation of this, if it would occur, actually is just a warning from the Veterinary Licensing Board, and it is actually confidential. It does not go into your record. It will not appear in the Veterinary Licensing Board website. The reason being is that there's an honest sense that if you chose not to report, that it may have just been that you really didn't maybe have all the information ideally that you should have, and that once you've been made aware of that you would take steps in the future to then subsequently act and report when needed. If on your second violation, if after that warning, the fines are, it's $100, and then anything after that is a $500 fine. So again, we talked about that obligation is to report in good faith on your medical observation. And it is not a situation where you're required by law to actually prove it. Allison will talk a little bit, I think, about some of the elements that you might want, information you might want to collect, in addition maybe and/or things you would document if you are suspecting to help facilitate any investigation and any obviously subsequent action against the individual if it is found to be truly animal abuse. Everything in House Bill 33 is making this reference in terms of animal abuse, animal cruelty to existing animal cruelty statute, which is in Ohio Revised Code 959. Okay. So the things that I've listed here, all the things that are actually the sections that are referenced in House Bill 33 as reportable. And we can't cover every single scenario, but I think Allison will talk through some of these things that will help you formulate a little bit of some boundaries as to when you should report, when you shouldn't. But these are just different things. And again, we'll have the links are up there. You can go look at the actual statute in 959. You can read those sections. OVMA will certainly help you make, understand those if need be. Most of these kind of make sense. The abandon is a true abandonment of an animal. The malicious, the kill or injury, that obviously makes sense. If someone would deliberately poison an animal. The 959.13 applies to all animals, but again, House Bill 33 only covers companion animals we talked about. But those are kind of common sense things is what would constitute with respect to cruelty. So 959.13 actually also applies to livestock, and that's where a humane agent would take those sections and apply those in that situation. But really, most of what we're talking about, most of what we're talking about is 959.131 under the animal cruelty statute and the things that are listed there. Most of them, again, kind of make sense. The questions that would evolve around depriving food, water, shelter that would cause sickness or suffering, those are the ones where you're going to probably get into some judgment situations and might be a little harder. Also, the failure to actually treat a situation. And again, those are situations that Allison is going to talk about, and I think will help you frame some of that. But it's also important to understand we can't cover every scenario on that, and sometimes you're just going to have to make a judgment about and weigh in your professional judgment to what extent you think. And again, you're not required to prove it. You're only required to report what you believe in your best judgment to be animal abuse, or at least the potential for that. You should also know that in the law, that 959.131, there are also allowances, and this does not, obviously, we're not saying that animals are treated inappropriately in research, but there are exceptions there. There are exceptions, obviously, in the context if you're engaged in legitimate practice of veterinary medicine. There are also exceptions for animals that are in hunting sorry, there's a typo there. That's actually field trials. So those are exempt. So sometimes they will deprive them of maybe food or whatever. That actually under the law is permitted. And then anything what is known as a common training device. And that is not really all that well defined in the statute, but I think the humane agent can walk you through some of that if need be, if that was the situation. And then the last pieces are just animal fighting, dog fighting, and any sexual conduct with an animal. Those are all the things that are covered under House Bill 33 that you would be reporting on. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Dr. Lash here. Let her go, and then I'm going to, again, we'll both be available for questions after it's all done.
Thank you. I'll get my screen up. Let's see. There it is. All right. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. I am Allison Lash, and we're going to talk about a little bit more, dive more into House Bill 33. And the part that is relevant to all of us is the mandatory reporting of animal abuse for veterinarians. So what I'm going to hopefully answer is the question, I'm a veterinarian, what does this mean for me? I think you'll see that the bottom line is just keep doing your job, keep doing what you already know how to do. And then there's just, maybe a few extra steps that might come into play from time to time. So I am the medical director at the Cleveland Animal Protective League, and I've been a shelter rat for over 10 years. I also have done private practice, emergency work, and I am parent to kids, cats, guinea pig, fish, chickens, bees, everything. So lots of critters at home. At the APL, I consider myself first and foremost a shelter veterinarian. I would never define myself as a forensic veterinarian. That's not my training. That's not my passion. It's what comes with being a shelter veterinarian when you have humane officers on staff. So there are forensic veterinarians out there that are phenomenal. When you read their reports, they are just meticulous and beautiful. I like to think of mine as kind of the down to earth, quick and easy, quick and dirty type. So I'll show you some of those at the end. But my other duties at work are administrative. We also do quite a bit of low income qualified community pet care, surgeries every day, and then forensics is also on the list. At the APL, we get anywhere between 1,500 and 2,000 animals in through humane investigations a year. Okay, so I'm not going to re-go over this. This is what Jack commented on is expanding the cross-reporting of abuse of animals and people. And like Jack said, we're functioning under Ohio Revised Code 959. More specifically, most of what we're going to end up reporting is under 959-131, and that is the cruelty and neglect that we end up seeing coming into our practices. So under 959-131, I think the most common thing that we end up using, and it's a long read if you want to read the whole 959, but the most common thing that we end up using, I think, is what I have snapshotted here, is 959-131B, C, and D. And those are ones that comment on depriving of necessary sustenance, torture, torment, and then improper shelter if they're being housed outside. And these are companion animals. So we will move on, and feel free to type questions in the chat, and Kristen will collect those. Like Jack said, the Abuse Reporting Task Force was formed prior to the passing of House Bill 33. Our goal was to make some basic documents to have for recognizing and reporting abuse. And there are large animal and equine included, but we're not going to cover that today. We're going to stick with what's covered under House Bill 33. All right, so today the goals will be to recognize abuse, record it, and how to report it. We'll go through some case studies throughout, and then I'll share some expert report examples that I've had for some cases. And the terms animal cruelty and animal abuse will be used interchangeably. I go back and forth. Animal cruelty is a legal definition, so it's not something you have to worry about determining. You just have to have suspicion. So it's been shown time and time again that abuse occurring toward animals has a strong link toward abuse occurring toward people. National Link Coalition has a great website and more information on that. So when I approach a potential cruelty case, a suspected cruelty case, I always keep a few questions in mind. Is there unnecessary discomfort or suffering? Would a reasonable person have to be able to tell, would they be able to tell there was a problem? Is there reasonable remedy or relief? are they seeking that reasonable remedy or relief? And are the owners or caretakers following the agreed upon plan? So that doesn't mean that because they declined referral to repair the fracture that they need to be reported, as long as they're agreeing to a reasonable plan, which it could be splinting, pain medication, or something along those lines. So those are things that I try to keep at the forefront of my mind, because in the end, I know if any of these cases go to court, those are the questions that are going to be asked of me, either in a report or at court. Okay, so this link, and I think Kristen shared it, is to the animal abuse recognition and reporting documents on the OVMA website. And we created these to help guide the recognition and reporting. So I'll just share some of the slides as we go through. So the classifications of abuse, they have kind of expanded over the years. Simpler gross neglect is the majority of things we are going to see. That is hands down what I see on a daily basis is simpler gross neglect. Intentional physical abuse and torture, fortunately, those are few and far between. I don't see a tremendous number of those. I think those of you in emergency work may end up seeing a more biased amount like I do. And then those in private practice, you might see them occasionally. Organized animal abuse, I see that, once or twice a year, we get in a crew of animals that have been fighting. Sexual abuse, fortunately, we don't see much of that. When you do have an animal that has reported history of sexual abuse, you might be asked to collect DNA swabs, kind of like using a rape kit, and collecting some information to be saved for the prosecution. Ritualistic abuse, again, not common, but will be seen from time to time. And then emotional abuse. And emotional abuse is one that it hasn't been prosecuted much in Ohio, but it's really becoming more acknowledged and recognized. If you see, I think, and I've been commenting more on my reports as well, you see the dog that comes in, that any movement of the owner, the dog flinches. And those are things that we are much more aware of, and even document those. And that, coupled with the behavior of the owner, maybe some other questions, might point you toward reporting emotional abuse. Okay, so many forms occur, from minor neglect, that are going to be the majority that we see, to malicious harm, which is fortunately the minority that we're going to see. The big decision is when to educate and when to report. And when education fails, and I'm not talking about the malicious cases, if it's malicious, if it's intentional harm, it has to be reported. But when education fails, or intentional abuse is suspected, report it. And also, when there's reasonable belief the animal will go without care, report it. So somebody that leaves against medical advice, and they told you they had $20 to their name, they left without care, there's reason to believe that animal will go without care. All right, and that is not a real arm. That is, if any of you know the SAFER assessment, where you use like the fake hand to pull the dish out, he's holding the SAFER arm. So common presentations. So anything consistent, and this is intentional harm, anything consistent with trauma. So it could be anything: abrasions, fractures, head trauma, internal injuries, penetrating traumas, anything that comes in grossly injured should start to raise some concern. And this is and I'm not going to read through it, but it's a chart that has presentations listed, and then the findings that are suggestive of non-accidental injury, what you should document, and then testing and evidence that you would want to preserve. And again, a lot of things you are already doing. I would say the main difference with collection of evidence in a non-accidental injury case is photos. And that's something that you may not be as familiar with taking. So when you take photos, I have always been advised not to take them with my cell phone, because then your cell phone can be taken as evidence. So if your clinic wants to have a designated camera, so that if someone does take everything, or they can take out the card or something and pass that along, you might want to have that, just so you're not losing anything that is dear to you. Okay. So we all get presented with injured or sick animals every day. First question, what happened? What do you think happened to the client? They were always either hit by a car, attacked by a raccoon, or poisoned. Those are the three most common things that ever happen to an animal. So this is all I envision is raccoons and cats and dogs all hanging out together. So then our job is still figure out what really happened. So documenting the abuse is, again, what you're already doing. You already describing the animal in the medical record. You're already recording the physical exam. The difference is you're going to maybe further identify the people who are presenting the animal. With the history collection, you're going to still do your history, but you might put a little more detail in. Unusual behaviors and interactions. Some people, they seem like they don't care, or they just want to leave, or they don't want to be there, and maybe a girlfriend or a boyfriend made them bring the animal in. Photograph again, and have that separate camera, and look for evidence that, and this is in malice cases especially, evidence of chronicity or repeated injuries. Save any physical evidence and label them. And like you usually do, record your medical recommendations and whether or not they consent or decline to those, and document your follow-up. I couldn't say this any better, so I took it from the cruelty manual that was put out by Tufts, the ARL. It is a fabulous read if anyone wants to see it. It's a similar document to what the OVMA has, but much, much more detailed. I think it's 80 pages long. But key considerations are just always human safety first. Don't try to do anything heroic. Don't get in fights with people. Protect yourself and your staff first. This is of the utmost importance. Do we come into contact with people that could be dangerous? Yes. But typically if people are in there, and I think a lot of you will agree, if you're helping their animal and taking care of their animal, you're on their side at that point. But if there's any concern, call the police, have them come in, and to be present. And even after reporting, continue to be aware of your safety. I think most people are good and aren't going to do anything. But even where I work, maybe once a year, we'll have a photo of somebody that just says, if this guy approaches you, don't talk to him, don't share any information, and notify an agent. So you just remember, keep everyone safe. Treat the animal. You don't need to not treat it to be able to prove that it was abused. Do what you need to do, what you would usually do. And then you're not the judge or jury. You're not there to determine whether this person's guilty or innocent. You're there to document and recognize suspected abuse. And that's all we're asking. And are you going to report something that someone else doesn't think is abuse? Mm-hmm. Have I? Absolutely. And it is. It's not always clear cut. Avoid bias, and this isn't an exact science. There is so much gray, and the gray part is the trickiest part to navigate through. So we'll move on to here. So red flags. So like I said before, when people come in and they don't seem to be acting the way you think they should, or they don't want to tell you much, or maybe one family member is giving the other one weird looks, or one steps out and then somebody shares something else with you, all of that is very important to document. And sometimes if things are getting really confusing or stories are going everywhere, I'll just have someone else come in the room with me. and stay in there with me, and we'll talk about, what they think happened, or what they've been doing, how they've been treating it. So this is one. So this is an animal where a non-accidental injury is suspected, and it came in. Owner presented a 4-month-old pit mix that he gave it a routine bath 2 days ago, and his story was he takes a shower, and at the end of his shower he plugs the drain and allows the water to fill, and then he bathes the puppy. And he did this 2 days ago, and then the puppy came in and had some burns to it. So again, does the presentation of the animal match the story? Absolutely not. There's no way a human was standing in water that was this hot. Do I have to prove anything? Do I have to argue with him? No. We start treating the dog, document, photo, and submit this to the appropriate agency. And this is little Phoenix after. I've shared the after, so it looks happy. So she ended up just fine. Okay. So another case of neglect suspected. Adult pit bull mix left in a hot car. Okay, well, being stupid isn't necessarily a crime. At least it was acknowledged and found out. But then we saw Westy come in, and being left in a hot car wasn't his issue. So when I see cases like this, body condition scores 1 out of 9, I don't even care what the underlying issue is. It doesn't even matter. There's no reason this dog should look like this. He isn't a dog under medical treatment for anything. He's not a dog that someone, he's an end stage cancer hospice. It was just found in a hot car. So he is a dog I would absolutely report based on his body condition, in addition to the hot car. So animal fighting. And I don't know how many of you might come across fighting. And I'm hoping I can introduce a few things that maybe you'll know it if you see it. Dog fighting, a lot of times people that fight dogs tend to treat by themselves. They tend to have their own little pharmacy and supplies, suture kits, you name it. And I don't think we see a ton of them. We might receive information that someone's fighting dogs, or that somebody has some information, but it's not incredibly common. They're going to walk through your door, but you may see them. So when you get dogs from dog fighting cases, I think the thing I see most often is the distribution pattern of bite wounds is typically face and front legs. So when you're looking at a fighting dog versus 2 housemates that got in a fight, the 2 housemates that got in a fight, they probably have some penetrating wounds, maybe on their ears, maybe around their neck, but they don't have the old wounds. So you can see this dog has not only fresh wounds, but wounds at different stages. There's wounds that are scarred down from old fights. There's ones that are in the process of healing, and then there's some a little bit fresher. So that is very classic for dogs coming in with a history of intentional, encouraged fighting. And some of the client things you might see is they might only pay in cash. They might be a little arrogant and want to do things themselves. Maybe you won't get a lot of information. They might not seem too emotional that their dog's torn up. I think when we see 2 house dogs or 2 companions or 2 dogs from the dog park that got in a fight, people are in hysterics, even if it's a tiny wound. Other things you might see, a lean dog, but really well muscled, big thick chains, big thick collars, and then also if you end up doing diagnostics tests, any dog that I have a report that has been fighting or has suspicious wounds suggestive of fighting, we run tests for Babesia. And then a scar chart. So a scar chart is completed for any dog that comes in that has a reported history or wounds suggestive of dog fighting. And you'll see that you do red marks and blue marks. So you have recent injuries, and also the blue ones indicate scars. And it's very helpful when you take this to court, you know, after the dog's already healed, you have pictures of the dog after it healed, you have your initial photos, your scar charts, and your after photos. So accident or abuse. So I think this comes a point where it gets very challenging. It seems like anything that has sustained blunt force trauma, they come in saying it was hit by a car. And sometimes it's us to sort those out of, was it hit by a car or was it intentional abuse? And there are things that can look very similar, but there are things that are different. And on this page of the document that we have through OVMA, there are non-accidental injuries compared with motor vehicle accidents. So I won't read that to you, but it's a nice resource to have. So here is a dog that was reported to have been hit by a car. The owner came in with a deceased puppy, 2.5 months old, Boston Terrier that was hit by a car. All right, that can happen. I mean, they can run out and get loose. 2.5 months, kind of strange, but sure. So this was a deceased puppy. So any animals that have a reported history of unknown cause of death, I end up doing a full body X-rays to look for fractures, and also whenever there's a report of malice, we do full body X-rays. So this little puppy, one of the classic things when you're differentiating non-accidental injury from accidental injury is old injuries with new injuries. So this puppy not only had a new fractured rib, but older fractured ribs. So in this puppy's short life, you know, this guy had not only ended its life, but it already been beating the dog. And the girlfriend had a suspicion, and that's what led to us further investigating this. And in addition, this puppy also had, and I didn't put pictures up, but when you reflect the skin on the top of the head, there was a lot of hemorrhage and bruising. And that's another classic feature of non-accidental injury, is injury to different parts of the body. The distribution doesn't make sense from being hit by a car. All right, so this is an adult cat that was presented to us by local law enforcement. So sometimes when law enforcement shows up and they don't know what to do, they just show up at the vet with an injured animal. So this cat was reported to have suffered physical abuse, and that was the history we got. So she showed up, and this is a picture of her on Symbadol. So she's feeling good right there. But she had a fractured mandibular symphysis, and she also had a hernia, and she also had fractured ribs, both new and old. And that's the bruising around the area of the hernia. So again, differentiating, this easily could have been an animal that somebody presented and said, she was hit by a car. Each injury in and of itself, sure. Coupled together, they were in very different locations. There was evidence of old injuries and new injury. So this person is currently charged with cruelty and awaiting trial. And this is the kitty in foster. She's happy now and recovering. So we'll move on to reporting some abuse, and I have more cases to share, so I'm not going to spend time reading this. It's position statements. This is my personal cat. When I was fostering him, he somehow got on my roof, so I probably could be reported for something with that. So when you're recognizing abuse, it's the things we talked about. It's the emaciation with no known cause. It's a constellation of injuries that don't make sense together. It's a history that doesn't make sense with the presentation. An animal hoarding, and I think you might come across this a little bit more than you might realize, and I think these are really tricky ones. So to me, this is a classic cat from a hoarder. It's a juvenile cat. evidence of chronic URI, dirty, thin. He just, you know, arrived and he could present to your practice as just a, you know, young adult cat presented for URI. And, you know, I typically ask people, how long have you had this cat? And, you know, this person's answer, 2 years. Okay, so she's had it its whole life. She didn't just find it outside yesterday. So upper respiratory infection, thin, almost emaciated, filthy. I wish you could smell through this, but the odor of old excrement and urine. And cats are clean animals. It is darn hard to have a dirty young cat. So then the owner kind of smells like cat pee. The carrier's dirty. I'm not talking like garage, sitting in the garage dirty, but like caked on goo dirty. You know, you start to think about it, they rarely bring in the same cat. It's usually kind of a cat that looks like this. And then my, what I call the hoarder question is, I ask, how many cats do you have? So if someone asks me how many cats I have, you know, Allison, how many cats do you have? I have 5. And the hoarder question answer is typically, you say, you know, Mrs. X, how many cats do you have? And it starts off, well, you know, I have 4 that live downstairs and, you know, 6 that have to stay upstairs. And I'm watching 12 of my son's cats. And when they just start going down that path, either they don't know how many cats they have, or they're embarrassed to tell you. And oftentimes that warrants reporting. When you see a cat like this, you're getting that weird vibe, you're getting those weird answers. And I always tell people, you know, how many cats can I have? I don't know. We're not the numbers police. It's how many can you take care of? This, I think most of us would agree, is too many. So this was from a case where there were 105 cats living in an RV. So I think most people would agree that that's too many cats. And you can see, I mean, amazingly, a lot of them were pretty clear-eyed and healthy, but you'll see some of the ones that have the eye issues. But what you can't see, and again, I wish you could smell, even the cats that look like they're in good conditions stunk. And they stunk for probably a week before that smell got off of them. So when it comes to hoarders, and again, this is something that I pulled from the definition of animal research, of hoarding of animals, and it's stated better than I can. They fail to provide minimum standards of care. They're failing to even acknowledge the deteriorating conditions around them or the dying animals around them. Sadly, I think most hoarders have really good intention, but it's when that good intention turns into just unsustainable lifestyle for both them and the animals. And that does warrant a report. And I know it might be the nicest person, but in the end, you're helping not only the animals, but also the person. No human should be living in that. And there were 2 humans living in this RV with these cats. Okay, so I have a couple cases, and I'm just calling them, do I report these? And in the end, what I would report and what you would report are going to be 2 different things. We're not always going to see eye to eye, but that's the thing. It's just, if you suspect there's something wrong, please report it. And sometimes it's a quick phone call. It's just, you know, should I report this? And you might talk through it with the officer, the humane agent, or the vet if they have one on staff. And it might give you some clarification after coupling the history with the animal. But these are just some animals, and I'll tell you what I did with any of these. So a cat with severe bilateral entropion, untreated, cat's 3 years old, and he's been owned for 3 years. This is a dog with a tumor that grew over the course of a year. The owner has owned it 1 year. This is a dog that came in matted. The owner's had it all of its life. It's a young adult. So any of these could be classified as medical neglect. But the difference with all of these is the person sought care. Now with the cat with the eyes, did they seek care in a timely fashion? No. Could this be reported and prosecuted? It absolutely could. So, after surgery, things ended up fine, and the cat has gone on to do just fine. So this one wasn't reported. And the reason it wasn't is the cat was surrendered because of the condition to the shelter. So it's just kind of a different scenario than maybe you'd be in. But if you were presented with this cat in private practice and they said, I've owned this cat for 3 years, his eyes have been like this for 3 years, we've never done anything, that is something that's concerning and something that does warrant further conversation with the owner, maybe a call to your local shelter or law enforcement officer. This pup, although the tumor is ugly, it wasn't painful, it wasn't uncomfortable, and no action was taken. And this dog, when I see matted dogs, they run the gamut of whether you report them or not. When there's limb strangulation, when they're losing a limb or have to lose a limb because of the matting, there's usually an odor associated with that I would think a reasonable person should have been able to identify to get that taken care of. But this one fortunately didn't have any other issues other than just really gross matted hair. So no, that dog was not reported. Okay. This is a little pit mix puppy that has Demodex. Didn't just happen yesterday. There's been plenty of time for that to develop. So the question is do I report it? So again, it couples with the history. So if the person says, I just found this dog walking down the street, it's a client you've had for years, it looks like this. No, I wouldn't. I would just get to work and start treating. If the person said, I've had this dog for 2 months, it's been like this most of the time I've had it. I've tried motor oil, it didn't work. What should I do, doc? That I would report. And that is Oak having recovered from Demodex. Okay. This is an example of a dog that has strangulated limb. You can see the matting isn't severe. It's just kind of that cottony, fluffy fur, but around the legs it got a little bad. And this one did get reported and charges were filed because there was limb damage and limb strangulation occurring. So that front leg was almost not salvageable, but fortunately with time and medicine, everything ended up okay. But that one was reported. So another page from the handbook, and I'm not going to go over it. I'm just going to go straight on into what I think people might have questions about. Owners leaving against medical advice and or unable to pay for care or refusal to euthanize. I think all of us have had all of these scenarios. So people may leave for a variety of reasons. They might not have the money. They might not want to pay the money. They might not see the issue that you see. They might not agree with the treatment plan. And there could be cultural religious differences in the presented plan that are causing them to not treat. So first, the money issue. How do we try to be proactive about the money issue? How do we deal with they can't treat because of the money issue? None of us are doing this to get rich and not treat animals. We all want to treat animals. So ways that we can help with the money issue are like we do every day. You present a variety of treatment options. We present everything from surgical fixation of the leg to splinting it, making sure it stays on pain medication. Know your local resources as well. And this is a time to reach out. It's never the time when you're in that crisis mode, but know your local resources. There are some programs that do offer financial assistance, whether it's short-term loans, or sometimes they'll just help outright pay for something. And then there's also some low-cost clinics opening up. And like where I work at an animal shelter, but we have an income qualified program where we, for Cuyahoga County, where we offer either X amount of money toward medical care of an animal or provide the medical care for the animal as long as the people are income qualified. And then also knowing local shelters, could they surrender their animal? Something I do that, you're more than welcome to do, and I do it sometimes in lieu of reporting, is, say the dog comes in, it's a parvo dog, and they can't afford treatment where you work, and they say they're going to go to, practice B, and I call the practice and just see if they went. And if they didn't, then I report them. If they did, then good. So don't hesitate to call and to have those good relationships with each other to make sure someone showed up where they should. We work with a couple local emergency clinics, and they'll text me and say, we had a PIO come in, the owner didn't have any money, can you guys do something? So it's been really good relationships, and then they know the animal's getting treatment, and everyone can sleep well at night. And then lastly, if it's possible, seeing if your practice can offer some financing for these extreme cases where, it's a good person, they just are in a bind with something that cannot wait. So I always think of PIOs, parvo, and fractures. So in the end, when you have done what you can, and you still have reasonable belief they are not going to seek care, and the animal will experience unnecessary pain and suffering, report it. And sometimes it's as easy as the officer just showing up and saying, look, did you go get treatment for the pyometra your dog had? And they'll say, oh yeah, I went and got her spayed and she's fine. So refusal to euthanize. So that alone is not grounds for medical neglect. And a lot of people don't want to euthanize. And that's okay. But if they don't wish to euthanize, they have to continue to provide their animal care and be under the agreed upon treatment plan. And I always call it the agreed upon treatment plan because it has to be the one that we reach together, and not necessarily the gold standard, but the one that we have come down to, that for us to keep moving forward, this is what we're going to do. And again, if you've done all you can and you still have reasonable belief that either you can't keep this animal comfortable no matter what you do, or the owner is refusing what you're recommending to keep the animal comfortable, report. And these are some documents, reporting forms. I'm not going to go through these because I wanted to be able to show you some of the template, or the report forms I have of reports from cases. Reporting, so I think Kristen shared this already, but National Link Coalition, it has every county listed and who to report suspected abuse to in each county. So the forms that are made, they are optional, they're not required. I know some of it will be redundant with what you already filled out in your medical history, but it helps to have something clear to either fax over or email over. And there's even some handy check boxes to check off why your concern, or what your concern is. And then an exam form if you'd want to use it, small animal, and then also the same forms for large animal. So frequently asked questions, I think we might hit on some of those in the Q&A at the end. So I won't touch on these, short of, I think some folks think that, I'm not a forensics vet. I wasn't trained in forensics, but by nature of you being a veterinarian, you are an expert. You're an expert in animal health. You're an expert in animal medicine, and that's how you're treated in the courts too. Okay, so I reported it. What happens now? So few reports actually proceed to court. I would say the vast majority of cases I see, and I see a lot, end with just my physical exam and photos. That's the vast majority of them. And then the next subset of them results in the officer educating them. Sometimes there's a compliance agreement put in place. Maybe they have to surrender their animal, or they have to get X done by a certain date, get what treatment was recommended by a certain date. And that happens quite a bit. Education compliance agreements happen very, very often. And then less commonly, charges are filed. So when charges are filed, it still does not mean that you're going to be asked to go to court. It doesn't even mean that you'll be asked for an expert statement. So after charges are filed, then the person that's charged with cruelty has the option of reaching a plea agreement, which circles back to typically a compliance agreement and some restitution. And the other option is they always have the option to go to court. We go to court so infrequently. Out of the thousands of animals that I have seen, I think I have testified, I could probably count on one hand how many times I've testified in court. The number of times I've gone to court and then just to sit around and wait for nothing and then a plea agreement's reached, probably maybe a dozen times. Really, everyone works to settle these things before they go to court. This is another nice thing from the Tufts and ARL book, is writing a forensic or veterinary report. They kind of spell it out like that, but then I'm going to show you some of mine. And again, in the future, if you have questions about writing them, I keep mine pretty simple. You have to keep in mind your audience. It's not veterinarians. It's not medical people. It's attorneys. It's a judge. They're going to be reading what you write. So when you're asked for an expert report, this is in addition to the medical records and diagnostics. Keep it concise. You know this stuff. You got this. And make sure non-medical folks understand what you're saying. If they don't understand what you're saying, it can lose the power of what you're trying to convey. So this was a report for a dog that came with an old, untreated fracture. So the dog was actually taken from the owner because of lack of treatment. Another practice called us and said they came in, they left with 5 days of pain meds, and then they fell off the face of the earth. And with follow-up, we realized that they didn't. They just went home and that was it. They had the 5 days and that was all. And I think they still even had the 5 days of pain meds when we got the dog. But what we're looking to see is, describing the dog, describing your exam. And again, they'll get the records as well. But then what the courts want to know is, going back to 959-131, is, did this animal suffer? Did it needlessly suffer? And, typically the answer is yes, no. And you can usually summarize that pretty easily. Okay. This was a twofer that animals came in at different times, but under the same case, under the same owner. And the statements that we put are the questions they're asked. Would these be clear to a reasonable person that this is occurring? And like for the dog, it had an embedded collar, and the collar had grown into the dog's neck, left an infection that could be easily smelled. So, and it would be very easy to tell that the collar was too tight. Sometimes I step back and I say, would my kids, would my 9-year-old kids know that this is a problem? And you'll see in a lot of my writing that I put any reasonable person, or that there's reasonable remedy or relief for the issue. And this was that little puppy that was died of blunt force trauma, that was not hit by a car. So, and you'll see that I left it in pretty lay form. I don't get too medical. And, if called upon further, we can bring all of our medical stuff along. But a lot of these, even after you write a report, it's usually enough that the person knows that going to trial is not a good idea. Testifying. So in the rare event that you will testify, it is not the scariest thing in the world. I have never been treated with anything other than respect. But at the same time, it makes you a little nervous because you're afraid you're going to go to jail for saying something wrong. So you are the expert. You will be treated like the expert. A lot of yes/no questions. You're typically asked for a resume. So those of you that have been doing this for 15 or 20 years, like I have, might want to get one ready. Just have one there just in case, because the last thing you want to be doing is working on a resume when you're in a pinch. Answer the questions. Take your time. It's not a rush. It is okay to say I don't know, or I'm not certain, or I didn't see that. Ask for clarification if you need it, and also bring whatever was submitted for evidence. So the medical record, you could have copies of x-rays, copy of your report, and have them handy, but they had to have been submitted in advance. You can't just walk in with new materials. And I typically ask if I can refer to my notes if I need to. And typically notes need to be referred to when you have like larger scale cases with a lot of animals. So I'm going to leave it at that and open up to questions. And please feel free to email me with questions. I don't know everything, but I've done quite a bit, and I'm happy to answer questions or point you toward resources that might help. And then I think Kristen has probably been collecting questions if we have some.
We do.
So I tell you what, Allison, if you want to take a look at those and see what you feel comfortable answering right off the bat, I'm just going to answer real quickly a couple that were posted before.
Where are they?
Oh, you see the chat feature? Click on the chat box.
Oh, there it is. Okay, got it. Okay.
We were asked a question whether you can anonymously submit. And under the provisions of House Bill 33, now you can't do that anonymously. I mean, as a veterinarian, you're required, and certainly the humane agent wants to know that you are a veterinarian because they're going to give certainly more credence. So the answer to that question is no. You can't anonymously report and meet the criteria of House Bill 33. There was also a question about if you hear hearsay. I would tell you that, unless you've actually seen the animal, you could certainly, if someone comes to you and says, I think my neighbor is abusing their dog, you could say to your neighbor or that person, I would encourage you to call the local humane agent and talk to them about that. You don't necessarily have to get involved, because if you were involved, I think there would be a sense that you had seen the animal, would have actual medical knowledge of it, unless of course you had. So those are just a couple I wanted to touch base on with respect to that. And
yeah, well, there's some good ones. I can, scroll up through these. I'll just start at the bottom. What if a parent reports a child caused the harm? For example, a rubber band was placed around a dog's mouth and not discovered. We do get instances of children and abuse reported at the hands of a child. And I think that is incredibly important to report. And yes, I would absolutely report that. And that ends up being dealt with through juvenile court. Do you report to the county your hospital is in, or the one the client lives in? Wow, that's a really good question.
the law doesn't specify, Allison. I
Yeah.
would think, part of me would think it'd be where the client lives, because it'd be easier for the humane agent to go investigate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that does make sense, because I'm trying to think. We've had concerns because we're in Cuyahoga. We'll have some calls that come from different areas. Yes, yeah, where the client lives. Good answer, Jack. And a concern I have is what shows up about your practice after you report on social media. Yeah, that stinks, and people are going to air their grievances wherever they can. And I really, it's one of those things where you probably have to practice every ounce of your just self-control and discipline when somebody chooses to, put that out there. And I don't think there's much you can do. I don't know, Jack, if you think there's any action that could be taken regarding social media.
Well, and there's some resources on how to deal with, just generally speaking, disgruntled people on social media. But I would say to you, that's one where you can honestly say, I reported because legally I'm required to.
Yes.
And just leave it at that. One thing I think you have to remember is all of your counterparts in human healthcare have to do this now with respect to potential child abuse. And they go through these scenarios, and I'm sure. So I think if you simply said, if you chose to respond and simply said, I was meeting my legal obligation under Ohio law, end of story. It's kind of hard to argue with that one. so to speak. And I think it's conversely, I would also raise that if it came out that you had a situation and you didn't report, someone might also choose to put something on social media there too. So I think it can go both ways.
Interesting. Yeah. And sometimes, yeah, that is a good reply that I was obligated to report it. And then boy, you let the other people take over, they'll probably just go to town on somebody knowing that if the person discloses the truth. I mean, it's, I guess, two sides to every story. Do you have to tell the owner you are reporting? You do not have to tell the owner you're reporting. You can. And like Jack said, and I use the same line too, where, I'm obligated to report this. And now I can say I'm legally obligated to report this. And typically, and if people are like, well, but I didn't do anything. Well, if you didn't do anything, then there's not going to be a problem. So if so, are you afraid they will flee with the animal or destroy evidence before this can happen again? Yes, we're always afraid people will destroy evidence. We just had a case day before yesterday where somebody just moved a bunch of dogs about as quick as they could. That yes, we always worry about that. Can you refuse to send the animal home with the owner if abuse is suspected? I would say no, but I also would say, where I am in a shelter environment, I always try to play just, best interest of the animal. And even if they don't have any money, even if there's some issues, just let me keep her, let me hospitalize her for the next day or so I can monitor her. If there's anything you can do to keep the animal in a reasonable way, even if it's doing it overnight at no charge or long enough that you can get law enforcement there. And I think that's an important thing and something that you could do. Okay, let's see.
That's a really good, and I'll just add, I mean, that's a
Mhm.
great way to approach it, Allison. I think what you need to remember is that animals are property in the eyes of the law. And so that if you would refuse to give someone their property back on a suspicion, I think it would have to be extraordinary. I think what you suggested, let me treat it while you try and get somebody else there to do, and to act on it rather than you basically seizing their animal. I
Mhm.
think that probably could present some problems for you.
Yep. Yep. Discuss fear of retribution from a mean client you reported and safety of you and your family. Yes, and in small communities, I totally get that and hear that that's a concern. And I think we all just have to know to um, recognize when someone might seem overly upset about something versus maybe somebody just might seem sad, or just recognizing if you get that feeling that something is more concerning than normal. So and if there's any threats, report those, because people, just because you reported somebody, they can't threaten you, they can't stalk you, they can't be menacing, and you can report that to local law enforcement. Let's see. You mentioned leaving it. What is your stance on clients who are against euthanasia and feel pets should die naturally at home despite being told this is unkind? And that is one that if somebody just says, I want him to die at home, okay, that's okay. But if you feel the animal is suffering and they are not providing some degree of treatment that you agreed upon, then that is a reportable case, because they have to be able to provide so the animal is not needlessly suffering. Good questions.
One came in at the bottom, and you had answered that, which is no, you do not have to notify the owner you're reporting them.
I do. I am very comfortable telling people I'm reporting them. And even internally, when I see patients through, it's called Project Care, our low-income outpatient, if there's issues, it's typically like the hoarder type stuff. I'll tell folks, look, this is the second cat you've brought to me that looks like this. I'm concerned. We did the hoarder cat question. How many cats do you have? And the number is somewhere between, I don't know, and 25. And I tell them, I'm like, I'm going to report this. it doesn't mean that you're gonna have your cats taken away, but I do have to report this because, you know, I think you're in over your head and that stuff isn't going right. Or if it's abuse, if somebody comes in and, you know, she said that her boyfriend beat the dog, you know, I'm okay telling her that I have to report this. And like with humans, I think a lot of people understand that and even are very supportive of it.
The question on, can you legally post a picture of the abused animal? I would not do that. I think you could set yourself up, because you're essentially, we don't, I mean, there's a presumption of abuse, but you are not, you're in essence, particularly if you had the owner's name that was associated with that, then you are potentially, it's a potential situation of defamation of their character. I just would not post a picture. I think that you're getting into some privacy issues, and I just would not, again, I would just simply say I was legally required to report. It's under investigation and leave it at that. I would not go any further than that.
Do you think the local vet, the only one in town, is in a more scary position than you being attached to the APL? Possibly. And I do think some of the smaller areas, yeah, are more visible, more known as the vet rather than, you know, like me working at the beast of an organization that has so many people working there. And it's definitely something to be concerned about. But, you know, again, make sure that you are in contact with law enforcement and tell them of any concerns you have.
I think I mean, and I think it's a very real concern a lot of people have. And not that I'm not going to tell you, obviously it can't happen and there wouldn't be some individuals who might be threatening. But again, I would go back to what I had stated early on, as I had talked to my counterparts in other states where these laws have been in existence for some time. And it's not something that has commonly occurred in terms of, you know, those kinds of threatening situations. Can it happen? Of course it can. But again, as Al, I mean, that's where you need to get local law enforcement involved. And again, it's kind of the same. It'd be no different than if one of your local physicians in town reported child abuse to the authorities. I mean, it's the same. I understand the concern, but it's kind of goes, I don't want to say it goes with the territory, but it's an obligation. And I think most people, it's important to remember, most people in your community are absolutely going to applaud and respect you for doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything else? Any other thoughts or comments? Well, thank you for your interest in this and coming to this. And please email me if you have questions. I'm happy to answer what I can. And I work with a great humane agent who I run things past too. And sometimes it's just getting more comfortable with reporting.
And that kind of just one final thought with respect to humane agents. I think it makes great sense if you don't know who your humane agent is in your county. It would be a good time to just pick up the phone and say, I just want to introduce myself. I know there's this new law and I just wanted to let you know who I am and find out who you are. And hopefully I can bounce some things off of you as we try and figure, because I think you establish that relationship, it will help you with some of those iffy situations. So, you know, this is a good time to do that, you know, for all concerned. So.
It is nice. And it can be such a cool two-way street. You know, if there's anything that you can tell the agency that you can offer them, you know, even just having your contact information, because sometimes they have a really quick question and they don't have a vet on staff and they need to ask someone something. So it's a real neat line of communication to have open, and a good relationship that can form. So then you can have just quick and easy questions back and forth. And with humane agents, even with mandatory reporting, the numbers aren't increasing. I think we're getting ready to train 21 new agents in about 2 weeks. So there's not going to be a bunch, and that's just, there's that many people because of no training occurring last year. So it's not that we're going to have a huge increase in agents. So there is going to be some probably increase in their attention, and then but certainly reach out, introduce yourself, and yeah. So
Does anybody else has any? I mean, I absolutely appreciate and thank Allison for all of her efforts, not only today, but certainly her work over the past year, and that of her task force has been phenomenal. One of the better projects OVMA has been involved in recently. I would also share that there's actually some training videos that have been in the works, and we hope to have those out and available next month. That will create some scenarios and then some post commentary to kind of give you some reasons why maybe you would ask this or suspect that. So again, just one more tool to help you out. And again, all those things are on the OVMA website for you to access. You have one more to report. So
do you report rescues? Oh boy. Oh yes. So I lump rescues kind of into my hoarders because a lot of times, again, good intentions gone wrong. And usually if you report the rescue, they're probably already on that county's radar, and it helps so much coming from a veterinarian that's actually seeing the cases. And with rescues, sometimes we interact with rescues in different ways. Sometimes you end up cleaning them out, you end up shutting them down. Other times there might just be some education, or maybe they need some help. Maybe they need some help decompressing, and we take some animals from them and educate and move on. But yes. When they have issues, yes. Is euthanasia of a relatively healthy pet considered abuse? I don't think so, because there's all different reasons to euthanize the animal. But again, it's know your resources. If the animal's otherwise a healthy, friendly, rehomable animal, having a relationship with the local shelter, maybe you can call them and say, hey, look, somebody has this 2-year-old dog that's just a little crazy, and they present it for euthanasia. Could you guys take it?
I think the other thing is that decision, you can obviously, as a veterinarian, you are not required to euthanize an animal. If you think it's healthy and you just don't feel comfortable, you can certainly present a lot of other options to help rehome it of that nature. But but asking to euthanize a healthy pet really doesn't, that's a stretch. And I don't think you would, again, we have to kind of go back into this. It's a little bit of a gray area, but I don't think that would be viewed as abuse in the eyes of the law. So.
And then what do you do if report is investigated, but you still see animals dying? Does that, I'm guessing, and correct me if I'm wrong, that means like you report from a hoarder, but you still see animals coming in from that same house that are having issues. And correct me if I'm not understanding that right. If that's the case, report again, call, use that relationship that you have. And then if you're ever concerned that your report isn't going where it needs to go, escalate that report, whether it's to a supervisor, if the humane agents are through an animal shelter, to the director of the animal shelter, the veterinarian, if there's one there, if you're comfortable talking to them.
And I would just tell you, with respect to House Bill 33, every time you see it, you should report it. What happens after that? I mean, I think Allison, raise or try and see if there are others who can get involved if you don't feel it's being acted upon. But that's not really something that you can necessarily influence or act upon other than what Allison already shared. So. Don't think unless there's any. It is on the website in terms of the contact, and Columbus Humane does have humane agents. Yes. So yes, you could absolutely go there. That's where I would go.
And
But
the
all
national
counties.
link, yeah, has all counties listed, and it's a wonderful summary. It also has how to report like child abuse, elder abuse on that one page. Yes, there it is.
Yeah.
Okay, well, those of you in
Okay.
Cuyahoga County, I look forward to hearing from you. Feel free to reach out to me, or I can connect you with our Chief Officer, Joe Delano. He's our main guy. So if you live in Cuyahoga County, we're your person.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've covered it. Again, thanks for all your time. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you.
And,
Thanks, everybody.
all right.
Thanks,
Take care.
Jack. Bye.
Bye.